glass door of Meridian Financial burst open with violent force, sending cold Chicago winds swirling through the marble lobby. Three masked figures stormed in, their heavy boots echoing off the pristine floors like thunder. Employees dove behind desks, their screams piercing the air as one robber waved a gun toward the terrified crowd. "Everyone on the ground, now!" In the chaos, security cameras captured everything. The panic, the terror, the way powerful executives crumbled to their knees. But in the corner, near a maintenance cart, stood one man who didn't flinch. Marcus Washington, the night janitor, remained perfectly still, his weathered hands steady on his mop handle, his dark eyes calculating something the cameras couldn't capture. What happened next would change everything anyone thought they knew about courage, wisdom, and the invisible heroes walking among us. But before we dive into the story, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. It helps us share more stories. Marcus Washington had been invisible for 3 years. Every night at 9 p.m., he'd slip through Meridian Financial's employee entrance, push his yellow cart through the gleaming corridors, and clean up after people who never bothered to learn his name. At 62, his graying hair and quiet demeanor made him blend into the background, exactly where society expected a black janitor to remain. The CEO, Victoria Sterling, was everything Marcus wasn't. Sharp-tongued, brilliant, and ruthlessly ambitious, she'd built Meridian into Chicago's most prestigious investment firm. Her corner office overlooked Lake Michigan, and her handmade Italian shoes clicked with authority across floors that Marcus mopped each night. She noticed him the way people notice furniture: functional, necessary, but unremarkable. Victoria's world was built on quick decisions, calculated risks, and reading people within seconds. She prided herself on knowing everyone's worth, everyone's place. The cleaning staff? They were overhead expenses, easily replaceable. She'd often worked late, stepping around Marcus as he emptied her trash, never once wondering about the man behind the uniform. The other employees fell somewhere between indifference and polite acknowledgement. Sarah from accounting would nod occasionally. Mike from security would grunt a greeting. But mostly, Marcus existed in that strange space reserved for service workers, visible enough to do the job, invisible enough to ignore. What none of them knew was that Marcus Washington carried secrets deeper than Lake Michigan itself. Behind his gentle eyes lay a mind that had navigated boardrooms in 3 different countries, spoken to UN delegates, and solved crises that had stumped teams of experts. But life has a way of humbling even the most accomplished, and sometimes the most qualified person for the job is the one no one expects. Tonight, as Marcus pushed his cart through the lobby at exactly 10:47 p.m., he had no idea that everything was about to change. The building felt different. A tension he couldn't name hung in the air like smoke. His years of reading situations, of sensing danger before it arrived, made his shoulders tense. Something was coming. The first robber through the door moved with military precision. Marcus recognized the stance immediately. Ex-military, probably special forces. The second one was nervous, sweating despite the cold, his gun hand shaking. The third stayed by the door, watching the street. "Safe! Where's the safe?" the leader shouted at Victoria, who had been working late in the lobby area, reviewing quarterly reports. Her face had gone white, but her jaw remained set in stubborn defiance. "We don't keep cash here," she said, her voice steadier than her hands. "This is an investment firm, not a bank." The nervous one stepped forward, pressing his weapon toward her. "Don't lie to us, lady. Rich place like this, you got money somewhere." Marcus watched from 20 feet away, every instinct screaming at him to act. But he also saw what others missed. The leader's eyes constantly scanning exits, the way he kept checking his watch. This wasn't random. These men knew something about Meridian's operations. "Check the computers," the leader barked. "Transfer accounts, crypto wallets, something." Victoria's eyes widened. Marcus saw her glance toward her laptop, still open on the reception desk. Her fingers had been flying across the keyboard just minutes earlier, probably authorizing the quarterly wire transfers that happened every 3 months. Tonight was transfer night. Millions of dollars in client funds moved to secure offshore accounts. The nervous robber grabbed Victoria's laptop, but his hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. "I can't figure this out," he snapped, It's asking for passwords, authorization codes. Then make her do it, the leader growled, turning to Victoria with cold eyes. You're going to transfer $2 million to this account number, or people start getting hurt. Victoria lifted her chin. I won't steal from my clients. The slap echoed through the lobby like a gunshot. Victoria stumbled, her hand flying to her cheek, but she didn't fall. The other employees whimpered from behind their desks, but Marcus saw something else in Victoria's eyes. Not just fear, but a growing rage that might get her killed. You think you're tough? The leader snarled. You think your money makes you untouchable? Transfer the funds or I'll start with that scared kid over there. He pointed his weapon toward Tommy, the 22-year-old intern who was sobbing behind the reception desk. Marcus felt his heartbeat slow, the way it always did when crisis hit. Time seemed to stretch, and suddenly he wasn't a janitor in Chicago. He was back in Damascus negotiating the release of hostages. He was in Mogadishu, talking armed rebels into laying down weapons. He was in conference rooms where million-dollar decisions hung on his ability to read people, understand motivations, find the path through impossible situations. The leader was checking his watch again. They had a timeline. Someone was expecting them to be gone by 11 p.m., which gave them 8 minutes. The nervous one was getting more agitated by the second, a dangerous combination with a loaded weapon. And Victoria, brave but foolish, was about to get herself and others killed with her stubborn pride. Marcus made his decision. In the stretched silence of those crucial seconds, Marcus's mind traveled back 25 years. He stood once again in a Geneva conference room, surrounded by diplomats from 12 nations, all of them shouting at once in different languages. The humanitarian crisis in Somalia was spiraling out of control, and millions of lives hung in the balance. Gentlemen, he had said quietly, and somehow his voice had cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. Let me tell you what's really happening on the ground. Marcus Washington hadn't always been invisible. For 15 years, he'd been one of the State Department's most valued crisis negotiators. His gift wasn't just languages, though he spoke 7 fluently. It was reading people, understanding what drove them, what scared them, what they truly wanted beneath their demands. He talked warlords into peace treaties, convinced terrorists to release hostages, and guided corporations through hostile takeovers that could have collapsed economies. His colleagues called him the Whisper because he never had to raise his voice to command a room. But government work had cost him everything that mattered. His wife Sarah had died in a car accident while he was in Beirut, negotiating for American prisoners. His daughter Lisa had grown up with phone calls instead of bedtime stories, postcards instead of presents. When she'd graduated from Harvard Law, he'd been in Nigeria, preventing a civil war. The day he'd walked away from the State Department, his supervisor had begged him to reconsider. Marcus, you're the best we've ever had. You save lives. You prevent wars. I couldn't save my marriage, Marcus had replied quietly. I couldn't prevent my daughter from growing up without a father. He'd moved to Chicago to be closer to Lisa, taken the first job he could find that didn't require background checks or explanations. For 3 years, he'd pushed a mop and found a strange peace in invisible work. No lives depended on his decisions. No governments waited for his recommendations. But old instincts never truly die. As he watched the nervous robber's hands shake, Marcus saw the micro-expressions he'd learned to read in war zones. Cocaine withdrawal, recent use wearing off. The man was crashing, which made him unpredictable and dangerous. The leader kept glancing at the street. They had backup, or they were meeting someone. And Victoria, God bless her stubborn heart, was about to trigger a catastrophe with her defiance. Marcus looked at his mop, then at the people cowering throughout the lobby. In 8 minutes, this could turn into a massacre. He'd spent 3 years trying to forget who he used to be, but some skills come back like muscle memory. It was time to remember. Excuse me. The words came from Marcus so quietly that at first no one heard them. He stepped away from his cart, moving with a calm precision that seemed to bend time itself. I said excuse me, he repeated, louder this time. All 3 robbers spun toward him. The nervous one actually laughed, a high, hysterical sound. The janitor wants to talk, he sneered. Hey, old man, get back to your mop before... You're making a mistake, Marcus said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had once stopped armies. All of you. The leader's eyes narrowed. Something in Marcus's tone, his posture, the way he held himself made the armed man hesitate. You think you know what's happening here? Marcus continued, taking another step forward. You think this is about money, but it's not, is it? He looked directly at the leader. You're not thieves, you're soldiers, special forces, probably Marine recon, judging by your stance and the way you cleared the room. Someone hired you for this job, told you it would be simple. Get in, get the money, get out. The leader's weapon wavered slightly. How do you? Because I've been where you are, Marcus said gently. Different uniform, different war, but the same look in your eyes. You're following orders from someone who didn't tell you the whole truth. Marcus turned to the nervous robber, whose hand was shaking worse now. And you? Son, when did you last use? 4 hours ago? 5? You're crashing hard, and that makes you dangerous to everyone in this room, including your teammates. Shut up, the nervous one screamed, but Marcus kept talking, his voice steady as stone. The withdrawal makes everything feel like a threat. Your vision gets tunneled. Your judgment gets cloudy. Right now you're seeing enemies everywhere, but I'm not your enemy. Marcus looked back to the leader. Your friend there is about 3 minutes from a complete breakdown. When that happens, people die. Is that what you signed up for? You don't know anything, old man, the leader said, but doubt crept into his voice. Marcus smiled sadly. I know more than you think. I know that whoever sent you here didn't tell you about the motion sensors that activate when the building's main security system goes offline. I know about the silent alarm that connects directly to Chicago PD's tactical unit, not just regular patrol cars. Victoria stared at Marcus in shock. How could a janitor possibly know about their security systems? I know, Marcus continued, that in approximately 4 minutes, this lobby will be surrounded by SWAT officers who've been trained to assume that anyone holding a weapon is a hostile target. The leader's face went pale. That's impossible. We disabled the alarms. Marcus shook his head. You disabled the obvious ones, the ones your client told you about. But you didn't disable the motion sensors in the HVAC system, or the pressure plates under these marble tiles, or the infrared scanners built into the light fixtures. He gestured toward the ceiling. Right now, 23 different sensors are tracking your movements and transmitting data to a secure server that automatically contacts law enforcement when specific threat patterns are detected. How do you know all this? Victoria whispered. Marcus looked at her with eyes that held decades of secrets. Because 3 years ago, I helped design this building's security protocol. It was one of my last consulting jobs before I decided to simplify my life. The truth hit the room like lightning. The calm, quiet janitor who had mopped their floors for 3 years wasn't who any of them thought he was. My name is Marcus Washington, he said, his voice carrying new weight. I spent 15 years as a State Department crisis negotiator. I've talked armed groups out of violence in 43 different countries. I've prevented 17 international incidents that could have started wars. And right now, I'm the only thing standing between you three and a shootout that will end with everyone in this room dead or traumatized for life. The nervous robber's gun was shaking so badly now, he could barely hold it. This is insane. This is all insane. Marcus turned to him with infinite compassion. Son, what's your name? What? Your name. Your real name. Danny, the young man whispered. Danny, how old are you? 24. Marcus nodded. Danny, I had a nephew about your age. Got mixed up with the wrong people. Started using drugs to deal with pain he couldn't name. You know what I learned from watching him? Danny was crying now, the gun wavering in his grip. I learned that most people who end up in situations like this aren't evil. They're hurting. They're scared. They made one bad choice that led to another, and suddenly they're standing in a lobby with a gun, wondering how their life got so far off track. Stop talking, the leader commanded, but his voice lacked conviction. Marcus ignored him. Danny, whatever brought you here tonight, whatever debt, whatever threat, whatever promise someone made, it doesn't have to end with violence. You still have choices. The cops will come, Danny sobbed. They'll lock me up forever. Maybe, Marcus said gently. But you'll be alive. And sometimes being alive is the most important choice you can make. The sound of sirens began in the distance, growing closer. Marcus looked at the leader. You've got about 90 seconds before this place is surrounded. You can try to shoot your way out, which will get everyone killed. You can try to take hostages, which will turn this into a siege that ends badly for everyone. Or, he paused, letting the weight of possibility hang in the air. Or you can trust someone who's been in your position before. Someone who knows how to get everyone out of this alive. The next 90 seconds unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. Marcus stepped closer to the leader, his movements slow and non-threatening. What's your name, son? Rodriguez, the man replied automatically, then looked surprised that he'd answered. Rodriguez, you're not a criminal. You're a soldier who got dealt a bad hand after your service ended. Someone convinced you this job would be easy money. No one gets hurt. Am I right? Rodriguez's weapon lowered slightly. How did you? Because I've seen it before, Marcus said sadly. Good people, trained to fight for their country, come home to find there's no place for their skills in civilian life. Someone offers them work that feels familiar, feels like a mission. The sirens were getting closer. Marcus turned to include all three robbers in his gaze. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to set your weapons on the ground. You're going to lie face down with your hands visible. When the officers come in, you're going to follow their instructions exactly. And then what? Rodriguez asked. Then you survive tonight, Marcus said simply. And tomorrow, you start making different choices. Danny was the first to comply, setting his gun down with shaking hands and collapsing to the floor in relief. The third robber, who had barely spoken, followed suit. Rodriguez held out the longest, but finally the weight of Marcus's quiet certainty broke through his desperation. He placed his weapon carefully on the marble floor and lay down beside his companions. Marcus walked calmly to the front door and opened it, stepping out with his hands visible as the SWAT team surrounded the building. This is Marcus Washington, he called out, former State Department crisis negotiator, credential number 774 Alpha November. The situation inside is contained. 3 suspects have voluntarily surrendered. No shots fired, no injuries. The tactical team leader approached cautiously. Marcus provided a brief, professional summary of the situation, explaining the suspects' likely motivations and psychological states, recommending a calm entry rather than an aggressive breach. Inside, Victoria Sterling watched through the glass doors as the man she'd thought was just a janitor coordinated with federal agents, like he'd done it 1,000 times before. When the suspects were safely in custody and the building was secure, Victoria approached Marcus in the lobby. He was already back at his cart, quietly mopping up the muddy footprints left by the tactical team. Marcus, she said, and for the first time in 3 years, she really looked at him. I need to ask you something. He looked up, meeting her eyes with patient attention. Who are you? Really? Marcus leaned on his mop handle and smiled, the first genuine smile Victoria had ever seen from him. I'm exactly who I've always been, Ms. Sterling. I'm just a man who's learned that every job has dignity, every person has worth, and sometimes the most important thing you can do is be exactly where you're needed, when you're needed. Victoria felt tears she didn't expect. But why? Why work as a janitor when I could what? Go back to a world where I measured my worth by how many crises I could solve? Where I sacrificed relationships for recognition? Marcus shook his head. Ms. Sterling, for 3 years I've cleaned your building, and you know what I discovered? She waited. I discovered that there's honor in honest work. I discovered that being invisible taught me to really see people. The security guard who stays late because his wife is sick, the accountant who brings coffee for the whole floor because she remembers what it felt like to be new and scared. I learned that power isn't about commanding a room. It's about serving others when they need it most. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, would you consider a different position here? We could use someone with your skills in corporate security, crisis management. Marcus smiled and returned to his mopping. Ms. Sterling, I appreciate the offer, but this building still needs cleaning, and I still need the peace that comes from honest work. Besides, he looked up with a twinkle in his eye, someone needs to keep an eye on things around here. 3 weeks later, Victoria implemented new policies at Meridian Financial. Every employee, from executives to custodial staff, now had their names prominently displayed at their workstations. Monthly company meetings included recognition for all departments, and the employee break room featured a plaque that read, "Excellence has no job title." She also quietly arranged for Rodriguez, Danny, and their partner to receive legal representation and connected them with veteran services for PTSD treatment and job placement programs. But perhaps most importantly, Victoria started staying later at the office, not to work, but to talk with Marcus as he made his rounds. She learned about his daughter Lisa, who had recently made partner at her law firm and was finally rebuilding her relationship with her father. She heard stories about diplomatic missions that had prevented wars most people never knew were brewing, and Marcus learned about Victoria's childhood. Growing up poor in Detroit, how she'd built her company from nothing to prove that a woman could succeed in a man's world, and how lonely it felt at the top when you forgot to value the people who helped you climb there. 1 year later, Marcus Washington still arrived at Meridian Financial at 9 p.m. sharp, still pushed his yellow cart through the gleaming corridors. But now employees throughout the building knew his name. They knew his story. More importantly, they knew that heroism doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It shows up quietly, consistently, ready to serve when service is needed most. The security footage from that night became legendary within the company, a reminder that extraordinary people often wear ordinary uniforms, and that wisdom sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. Marcus had learned something too. You don't have to change who you are to change the world. Sometimes the greatest impact comes from being exactly who you're meant to be, exactly where you're meant to be. In a world that often measures worth by titles, salaries, and social media followers, Marcus Washington proved that true value lies in character, compassion, and the quiet courage to do what's right when no one's watching, and especially when everyone is. If this story inspired you to look more closely at the heroes walking among us every day, share it with someone who might need reminding that everyone has a story worth knowing, and every person has dignity worth honoring.